about cheerleading as a sport. And before we begin, I want to tell you a story about a little girl named Patty. When she was 17, she fell in a stunt, and one of her bases hit her in the chest, and now she is 19 years old and living in a nursing home, unable to move, eat, or speak, all for something that's not even considered a sport. For all of those like Patty risking their lives every day, I'm here to convince you that cheerleading is in fact a sport. Many believe that it is all short skirts and pom-poms, but it's not. It actually takes skill and determination, just as any other sport. My name is Addie Martin, and I've been cheering since I was a little girl, and I love watching other sports on TV like soccer. As you can all see, we're in the world right now for soccer, and I love watching those things because we're all drawn to competition. Just like soccer, cheerleading has worlds, and they also compete. Alongside of football and soccer and other sports, cheerleading serves as a sport because it includes athletic activity, competition, and it does in fact have risks and injuries. First off, I'm going to explain to you guys what sport is, because before we can determine what's a sport, we need to define sport. And the definition of sport is an athletic activity requiring skill or physical prowess, and often a competitive nature. As you can see, many of the sports are represented here, and when you see sport, you think of basketball and golf, and even racing, but never cheerleading. But at the end of the definition, it says etc., and etc. includes cheerleading. I will admit that cheerleading was not a sport at first, but over time it has evolved into one, and the first thing that we need to go over to determine whether it's a sport is whether or not it includes athleticism. To be athletic means to involve the use of physical skills or capabilities, and as strength, agility, or stamina. When cheerleading first began, these are our first cheerleaders up here. They were the Princeton cheerleaders. And when it first began, they just clapped and said, "Go team." But as you can see now, these are current cheerleaders, and that takes skill, and definitely is what I would consider athletic. According to ESPN, King Harrison, a Georgia Tech senior cheerleader who once played basketball and soccer all through high school, he said that doing a cheerleading routine is very close to running a sprint full out. The only difference is you're holding two 50-pound weights above your head, because that's true. You're running a ton, you're just holding girls in between. It takes strength to hold stunts, and it takes stamina and agility to do this 2.5-minute routines, and is the very definition of an athletic activity. The next thing I wanted to talk to you guys about is cheerleading involves competition. According to New York Times, I'm confused. Cheerleading is actually more than standing on the sidelines. As you can see, she's pretty fierce in her picture because she's like, "This is competitive and I know it." As said on Bring It On, one of our favorite cheerleading movies, cheerleading on the sidelines is just practice for the real thing. NCA, which is the National Cheerleading Association, and UCA, the Universal Cheerleading Association, are just two of the very many organizations that hold cheerleading competitions, and these competitions go from regional to international, and the ICC are actually world cheerleading competitions. And cheerleaders are there just like every other competitor to prove that they're the best. According to a book called Sports Marketing, competitive cheerleading has estimated 1.5 million participants in the United States and 100,000 participants abroad. ESPN has also been filming it as a competitive sport since 1997. Their goal, just like any other sport, is to compete in order to entertain their viewers. Lastly, I wanted to talk to you about injuries and the risk that cheerleading involves, because let's face it, sports are really difficult and all sports include injuries. According to New York Times, emergency room visits for cheerleading injuries nationwide have more than doubled since the early 1990s, And according to the National Center for Catastrophic Sports Injury Research, 104 catastrophic injuries sustained by female high school and college athletes from 1982 to 2005, more than half of those resulted from cheerleading. Cheerleading has surpassed every other female athletic event. Jessica Smith was an 18-year-old Sacramento City College cheerleader, and she broke her neck falling from 15 feet high in a stunt. She, in her quote in her interview, she said, "They make you sign a medical release form when you join, but they ought to tell the girls that they're signing a death waiver." Lauren Gristizik, the head coach of Georgia Tech, while judging competition one time, she saw a guy actually rip his bicep straight from his arm. And she said when she was younger, they didn't have mats, and one of her flyers fell on her head and fractured her skull in 2 places. Her ears immediately started to bleed, and her eyes rolled into the back of her head. So don't tell me that cheerleading is not dangerous, because these girls are risking their lives every single day. According to ESPN, this kind of thing is very rare. Ripping your bicep and falling on your head is super rare, but every single day, just as any other sport, you have bumps, bruises, scratches, scrapes, burns. So that is why the American Medical Association on June 10th, 2014 declared cheerleading as a sport because it does have just as many risks and injuries. They said that if the NCAA would recognize cheerleading as a sport, then the girls and the boys would have more safety and measures when they're practicing and performing, and that the coaches would have to have proper training. As you've heard today, there's a number of reasons that cheerleading proves to be a sport, and those include athleticism, competition, and injuries and risk. And cheerleading definitely matches the definition of a sport. Cheerleaders do not need to fight for a ball. They can simply take pride and dignity in knowing that they're competing to do something that they love. That's it. Thank you.